The attack on two Minnesota state lawmakers comes amid a rise of politically motivated violence across the U.S. Police say the man accused of killing State Representative Melissa Hortman and injuring State Senator John Hoffman carried a list with the names and addresses of other public officials. Multiple states are now bolstering the security of their local lawmakers in the aftermath of these shootings. CBS News Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. And Scott, very good to see you. Talk to us about the current state of political violence and how does this compare to really even just a few years ago?
It's soaring, Nancy, by orders of magnitude. Over the past 6 years, the number of threats against members of Congress has tripled in 6 years. That is a bonkers increase. At the state level, you see versions of what happened in Minnesota happening nowhere else in that incarnation, but you hear those types of threats from social media to phone calls to messages to in-person intimidation spiraling in states throughout the country. CBS News has learned several states ratcheted up their security for state legislators over the past 72 hours. New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Ohio included. There are likely to be others. At the federal level, we know U.S. Capitol Police are trying to deploy more manpower, more resources away from the protective Capitol dome and into U.S. communities to better protect members when they're home, at those district offices, which are not fortresses, at their homes where they could be targeted, just like we saw in Minnesota this past weekend, and Nancy, as we saw a few years ago, when Paul Pelosi, the husband of Nancy Pelosi, was attacked violently in his home.
I know, Scott, that you're talking about bolstering security in the aftermath of what happened this past weekend. But overall speaking, how are state and federal authorities responding to this rise in political violence that we're seeing in general?
They're trying to figure some of this out as they go along, because you can't provide 24/7 protection for every legislator in America. You can't have them watched around the clock. There isn't enough manpower or resources for that. But a lot of these agencies, state police, federal police, recognize the vulnerabilities might be more acute when you get away from the floor of the legislature. You can have metal detectors to get into capitals. You have armed police around capitals across the country. You don't have that level of protection when you have a district office at a strip mall next to a fast food place in your neighborhood. Those are the places where they want to ratchet up more security. Look for more investments in panic buttons, security cameras, remote law enforcement, and look for taxpayers to help fund some of this, because somebody's got to get after it.
Well, Scott, in Minnesota, the suspect is accused of posing as a police officer, even perhaps interacting with an officer during that time. How does that complicate the way that local officials respond to these kinds of incidents, especially as things move so quickly?
You know, it does risk damaging the inherent trust you have in law enforcement if you're an elected official and call for somebody to come to your home. That's a possibility. There's a different issue, though, worth mentioning. There have been dozens and dozens of recent swatting attacks against state and federal lawmakers, where somebody makes a false call to 911 to get police to go to that target's home and potentially have a violent interaction. This incident in Minnesota could further erode some of the inherent trust that somebody has with police when they come to the door. That could instigate more swatting attacks and potentially a more damaging, violent one.
Scott MacFarlane, thank you very much for joining us with your reporting.